Benjamin Watson, welcome to Higher Ground with the Washington Times. Appreciate you joining us today.
Man, great to be with you, Billy.
All right, so I want to actually start. We've got a lot to talk about. You have a new book out, The New Fight for Life. We're going to talk about that. But I want to get into your testimony because people know you from the NFL, long-standing career. You are now retired and you're doing a lot with your time. You're fighting for the unborn. You're fighting for life in general, from womb to tomb, and we'll get into that. But, you're a believer, you're a Christian, and you've openly talked about your faith over the years. I know your dad is a pastor and you've got a long history. Can you take us through a little bit of your testimony, how you came to faith?
Well, I appreciate you asking that question because that's the greatest story ever told for all of us whenever we pass from death into life. And so often, I think as believers, we take that for granted, especially those of us who have been Christians for a long time. And we can never forget the beauty of the gospel, the power of the gospel, and the power of the supernatural power of what happened when we, were rescued from our sin and our condemnation. I got saved when I was a kid. I was pretty young. My father actually led me to the Lord with a very familiar verse, John 3:16. And he shared that verse with me one night after I was fighting with him and the teddy bear. Now, let me explain. I had a big teddy bear. I was about 6 years old. The teddy bear was about my height. And my dad, at 6'2", 250, former college football player, would get behind the teddy bear and box me with the teddy bear sometimes. And I don't know, he was trying to toughen me up or rough me up or whatever. It worked. But anyway, I was very, very competitive. And one night I lost and I said, "Daddy, you bring that teddy bear back. I'm not going back till I beat the teddy bear." So he brought the teddy bear back. And as the story goes, as I remember it, he let me win, I guess. And he engaged with me on a spiritual level after having that competition. I guess I was very curious about death and those sorts of things. And he asked me, even as a kid, "Do you know what will happen to you if you died tonight?" And I've been in church. I've been to Sunday school. I ate all the cookies and drank the juice, all that type of stuff. I was a Sunday school kid. So I knew the answer in here, but I didn't know it in here. And that's when he shared with me, and we prayed that night. And that's when I passed from death into life at a very, very, very young age. So it was my father who led me to Lord. My mother's a believer as well. So both of them had a role in it. But that moment, it was my dad.
Yeah. And it's incredible, too, because you grew up, stayed in the faith, went into the NFL, and you have been one of the most consistent, faithful, open about your faith football players I think we've ever seen. How did you hold on to your faith in the midst of the fame and the notoriety and the attention and all of that? Because that's a lot for any human being to grapple with, and you always seem to do it so well.
I had, honestly, great people around me was part of it. So many people ask, what is it like being a Christian in the NFL? And I say, you know what? I loved it because that was my church community. That was my body. Those are my peers. I remember a guy named Don Davis, who was a little older than me in New England, and he was kind of a spiritual leader on the team. And then when he left, I kind of became that. And then a guy named Matthew Slater, who's there now, has been playing for a long time. He was younger than me, and now he's been leading for a long time. And everywhere God placed me on our journey, in Cleveland, I had a group of men who said, "Hey, let's get up in the morning and pray at 6 o'clock." And I'm like, dude, I got to go to practice. I don't want to get up and pray. And next thing you know, I'm up with these two dudes and we're praying at 6 a.m. I'd never done that before. And then going to New Orleans, where I actually had the opportunity to baptize a couple of my teammates in the rehab pool in the training room. And wow. In Baltimore, my wife and I were able to lead a couples Bible study for the first time. I tore my Achilles. I was out for the year, and we said, well, I guess this is why we're here, just to lead Bible study, because I'm definitely not going to play any football this year. And so there were people along the way that encouraged me, and where you saw real fruit. Now there were tough and lean times too. I felt at times where, I want to do what everybody else is doing. And I remember my father telling me one time, the most miserable person in the world is a Christian who's not living like it. And I experienced that. I tried to have one foot in and one foot out. And you are the most miserable person because you know better than what you're doing. And so I can say that, throughout my career, God was faithful in a lot of different ways. And I saw a lot of fruit. And I'm still seeing fruit from remaining faithful to him, even when it was tough.
Yeah. And I mean, in addition to your faith, you have talked about a lot of tough issues, right? And you've had a voice because of your platform to really, as not just a believer, but as a human being, to speak into important issues. One of those issues, life, the unborn, but life in general. And I mentioned that term from womb to tomb, which we hear a lot on both sides of the abortion debate. You work with Human Coalition. You're a VP of strategic relationships there. And that's a pro-life organization. And so you've been very vocal in that movement. When you saw Roe v. Wade last year get overturned, what went through your head and your heart in those moments?
I think most of my emotion came, Billy, during the leak, when the leak came out about a month or so before. I was like, oh my gosh, like either somebody played a really cruel trick or this is going to happen. And so when it actually happened, I had a feeling of like awe and wonder, but not the same emotion that I had before. But I also felt a bit of a heaviness because I felt like, what's next? What's now? And I'm glad you mentioned the word womb to tomb. That does get thrown around quite a bit, but that's how I view it. One of our favorite verses in our family is Micah 6:8, talking about doing justice, loving kindness, walking humbly before your God. That's what we want to be about. And to us, womb to tomb means fighting for vulnerable people, no matter what their situation in life is. And obviously, when you're talking about the preborn child, that's one group of people that is some of the most vulnerable. But as Roe was overturned, I thought, is the pro-life movement ready? Because we had put so much effort into overturning Roe, which we should, from a legislative standpoint, marching at the March for Life. I mean, everything was geared towards that, which is vitally important and needed to be overturned. But what we're seeing and what I thought we might see is that women, men are still seeking abortions, that the law didn't change that. It was a necessary step, but the law didn't change that. And one stat we talk about at Human Coalition is that 76% of abortion-determined women say they would prefer to parent if their circumstances were different. And so what that tells me is that contrary to the popular, the loudest voices that shout their abortions, there are a large group of women who really don't want to get the abortion, but feel like it's necessary because either their partner is not standing with them, or there's healthcare issues or childcare issues or housing or employment. And I want the pro-life movement to be prepared to enter into some of these issues, which are part of that Micah 6:8 justice when we talk about it, and enter into that in a way that might be different than before and wider and cast a wider net than before so that we can address some of these driving factors.
Yeah, I mean, you think about the fact that I think a lot of people felt this would never happen, right? And so when Roe v. Wade was overturned, a lot of states where fewer people are having abortions, that means that all the things you just listed are now needs for a lot of these women and men who have now chosen to have their babies, or they need to have their babies because of regulatory changes. And so the question is, are we ready for that? And I think the answer right now is, in some places, no, people weren't ready for it. And so a lot of people are stepping up to the plate at the same time. I mean, I have seen, Abby Johnson, she fills, people's registries, right? Women who are pregnant, she goes out and buys items. She gets her followers to buy items for them. All these different things to sort of come alongside these women. And if you were to give advice right now to just not just the church more generally, but even Christians or people who are watching this or listening to it about what they could do or should do to help meet this need, what would you say to them?
Well, the first thing, and I talk about this in the book, is politics is very important in this country. That's how we get things done. That's just the system we were born into. Like, good, bad, and different. It is what it is. At the same time, I think politics sometimes becomes an obstacle to having substantive conversation about this issue specifically, and about it when you talk about it from kind of this womb and tomb mentality, and talk about healthcare legislation, for example, or educational funding. How does that immediately, we're red or blue? And I'm not saying that that's all bad, but I think for individuals and for myself, the challenge is to sometimes try to decouple some of these things, especially as Christians and believers, and say, what would the Lord have me to do? How would he have me to advocate or engage or vote on some of these things, even if they're outside of our political platform that I'm most comfortable in, and that's challenging. So that would be the first thing. Secondly, I would say, to find some organizations, and we talk about pregnancy resource centers. There's 2,700 of them in the United States, places that are doing this work on the frontline basis. They're not doing the legislative work. That's one side of it, but they are giving direct services, material needs, counseling, financial support, those sorts of things. And perhaps praying for those organizations, engaging, giving to them, volunteering, whatever your skill set is, bringing that to the table for this issue. And here's one that, I talk about a little bit in the book, but the next generation is always key for every single social change. So anytime society changes a mentality, whether it was about voting rights or you name it, technology, whatever it is in our past, it's always the next generation that is the primary focus in order to get those things mainstream. And what we've seen a lot is targeting the next generation for a bunch of things. If you watch TV with your kids, you'll see their advertisements. But when it comes to this issue, organizations like Planned Parenthood are targeting our young people, as they should, if they want their ideology to be mainstream and continue to be mainstream in the next 20 years. That's what you should do. So how are we speaking to our children about marriage, about sex? It can be a hard conversation depending on how you lived your life, but we got to do it. About justice, about race, about all these sorts of things, because we have to understand, as the Bible talks about in Psalms, when it talks about children being a blessing from the Lord and being like arrows in the hand of a warrior, we need to be sharpening our arrows so that they can then live the lives with the same convictions, or the convictions that perhaps are not as prevalent right now, especially on this issue.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And your book, The New Fight for Life, Roe, Race, and the Pro-Life Commitment to Justice, this is a book that deals with all these topics. Before we go here, my last question for you, when you're looking at this book, it's something you poured your heart and soul in, it's out there. At the end of the day, what are you hoping for people who read this? What do you want them to think or feel at the end of it?
I love history because it gives me a context to the present. So often, all we know is really when we woke up and we started living. That's not our fault. Think about it. My kids, I talk about Michael Jordan and the kids are like, who? I'm like, how do you not know Michael Jordan? Like, are you crazy? Michael Jordan. But it's not their experience. And so the only way we understand things is by digging into the history. And so what I want people to walk away with, this book, it has a lot of history in it, especially about racial history in this country. And the reason why I talk a lot about ethnicity, specifically descendants of American slavery, is because when it comes to the issue of abortion, Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely than their white peers to have abortions. The large numbers are probably more white Americans just by sheer numbers. But the percentages, there's no other ethnic group that has more abortions per capita than the Black community. And when I landed on that stat and I realized that, I started to wonder, like, why is that? Why is that happening? Because it's not enough just to talk about it. We got to understand, like, I want to know why, because then I can try to fix it. Is it simply because these people like killing their kids more than anybody else? That could be the case. I don't think it is, but that's one answer. Or are there a number of other factors that don't seem to be pro-life issues that are impacting this community more than others? And so I do a deep dive into policies and people and programs and how it's impacted us, America in general, but also race in the last couple centuries. I talk about those things, and then I bring it up to the church currently, and I bring it up more specifically even to the Black church. And I want people to walk away with a great understanding of how things got to be the way they are on the issue of abortion, but then not to be pulled down by it, because history shouldn't pull you down. It makes you sad. It makes you happy sometimes, but it empowers you to speak from a place of understanding, to empathize with people, and also see where you can be most impactful and effective in creating change. I want a pro-life movement to continue to love people, and I want them to demonstrate that in our actions, because I believe when we do that, even those who are detractors and those who are on the other side and make claims about pro-lifers, they will see our good works, and they will not only glorify our Father in heaven, but they will be more willing to perhaps join with us on some of these most important issues concerning life.
Yeah, and that's so powerful as we close out here, because I think there's a real need to help educate people on both sides and help people understand. I mean, you've seen 90 some odd clinic attacks, pro-life clinic attacks, since even before Roe v. Wade was overturned, when the leak happened, these attacks started. And I think that's because there's a real misunderstanding about what these organizations are doing for women and for families. They're actually filling a lot of these voids and helping meet these needs. And so I appreciate you taking us through that. And you're absolutely right. Learning through history is key. That's how you heal and move forward and understand the issues that have led us to where we are. Benjamin Watson, appreciate your time.
Man, appreciate you for having me, man. Anytime.